Putin thought he had it. A tiny village called Nardia, just 25 people, barely a dot on the map, was supposed to unlock the door to Kharkiv and the wider Donbass region. He captured it, and just weeks later, he lost it. Hard. In one of Ukraine's most brutal assaults of the war, elite forces launched a relentless 30-hour operation that completely shattered Russia's position in a key battleground. Now, Russia's defenses are in ruins. And Ukraine just pulled off a kind of victory that's eluded them for years, a turning point that could reshape the fight for eastern Ukraine. Here's how it all went down. On August 18, 2023, Russia launched a massive missile assault, which it combined with ground attacks on multiple Ukrainian regions. Ukraine's General Staff of the Armed Forces reported the damage caused in a Facebook post. In the past day, the enemy launched 4 missile strikes and 53 airstrikes, as well as 40 attacks involving MLR, multiple launch rocket systems, on the positions of our troops in populated areas, it said. As a result of Russian terrorist attacks, unfortunately, there are casualties among the civilian population. Residential buildings and other civil infrastructure were affected. Nardia was among the locations Putin's wide-ranging attack hit. Ukrinform says the village experienced enemy artillery and mortar fire as Russia began a renewed campaign to take it back. That initial assault wasn't successful. However, it triggered a multi-month battle over the tiny village that culminated in a seemingly final battle on January 4th. Russia won. Forces from Putin's Zapad, or West, stormed the small village of Nadiia, killing up to 590 Ukrainian troops in a single day. At least that's according to a report published by Russia's defense ministry. Putin's victory came on a day when Russia also claimed to have killed around 440 Ukrainian soldiers in battles involving Putin's center group, along with the destruction of an ammunition depot where 250 more Ukrainian troops died. Of course, this is all according to Russia, which makes the death claims spurious. But what is certain is that Putin succeeded in Nardia. The village has been a thorn in his side ever since he lost it back in October 2022, and he dedicated hundreds of Russian soldiers, along with artillery, mortars, and other munitions, to take it back. Putin had his route into Kharkiv once more, but it wouldn't last for long. Ukraine wasn't about to let the Nardia issue die. It couldn't. Allowing Russia to control the village would also mean giving Putin an opportunity to apply pressure on a key city that has already been devastated by Russia's invasion. So Ukraine plotted and planned. For around 2 months, it prepared for a counteroffensive that would turn it into one of the most remarkable achievements of the war so far. On March 23, 2025, Ukraine counterattacked. The result? Russia has just been pushed out of Nardia after a brutal 30-hour campaign to liberate the village. Confirmation of the liberation came on the same day from Ukraine's 3rd Separate Assault Brigade. The unit was formed in 2022 as a volunteer group that combines several of the Azov Special Operations Forces, or SOFs, that have been created by veterans of the former Azov Battalion. Those scattered SOFs were the remnants of the forces Ukraine stationed in Mariupol during Putin's initial invasion. Russia succeeded in taking Mariupol. The SOFs who remained began forming new recruits outside the Ukrainian city, with many gathering in other key Russian target locations, including Kyiv, Sumy, and the previously mentioned Kharkiv. It wasn't long before Ukraine's military took notice of these scattered groups of talented Special Forces soldiers. In January 2023, all of these small groups these former Mariupol defenders formed were merged into a single combat unit that became part of Ukraine's ground forces. Their goal was simple: act as an extremely mobile, well-equipped, and highly trained force Ukraine could deploy to capture any target that was needed. The 3rd Separate Assault Brigade did that job very well. It was almost immediately sent to Kherson, where it took part in the liberation of that town. It was also one of the first Ukrainian units to report any sort of combat success against Russian forces in the disputed territory of Bakhmut. In September 2023, the brigade also managed to liberate the Andrivka territory after months of fighting, even going so far as to repel a Russian counterattack days after taking the town. By May 2024, the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade was claiming it had killed, wounded, or captured nearly 600 Russian soldiers in the Kharkiv region alone. Make no mistake about it, the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade had all the credentials it needed. They were the natural choice for Ukraine to send when trying to liberate the village of Nadiia. And they were very successful. Over the course of 30 hours, the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade managed to free a little over 1 square mile of territory from Russian control, and they did almost all of it from the ground. The 3rd Separate Assault Brigade's assault on Nardia started with heavy artillery bombardments. Utilizing a tactic Putin has used so often, the brigade pelted the Russian forces stationed in the village with heavy shelling. Many of Russia's Nardia-based soldiers likely died in that initial assault. Those who didn't were forced to find shelter as more shells rained down, destroying what little infrastructure the village had left. With the Russian forces in disarray, the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade stormed the village. Supported by tanks and armored vehicles, The brigade first cleared the remnants of Russian forces in Nardia before turning their attention to the surrounding forest, into which many of Putin's soldiers fled. And that's not all. Ukraine's assault on Nardia also devastated two of Russia's motorized rifle regiments, the 752nd and the 254th of the 20th Russian Army. These types of regiments are common in the Russian military, and they often serve a similar purpose to the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade. They're mobile and well-equipped, allowing them to launch combined arms operations that include infantry, armored personnel carriers, and infantry fighting vehicles. Now 2 of them are no more as Ukraine celebrates the liberation of a village Putin has coveted since the beginning of his invasion. The Kyiv Independent published more details of Ukraine's success in Nardia on March 23rd. It shared a Telegram video, reportedly shot by a member of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, that shows graphic footage of the assault in progress. Ukrainian armored vehicles storm across an open field in the footage, which then switches to show soldiers firing their rifles into the woods that surround Nadia's derelict houses. In footage that we can't show on the channel, the video also shows multiple dead Russian soldiers, a grim reminder of both the horrors of the war and the scale of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade's victory. Andriy Beletsky, who's the commander of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, was succinct when reporting what his soldiers achieved. The capture of Nardia cost the enemy 2 months of effort and wiped out 2 mechanized regiments, he said in a statement. Beletsky didn't reveal how many Russian soldiers were killed during his brigade's counter-assault. However, that number is irrelevant at this point. Of the 147 clashes along the Ukraine war's front lines that took place on March 23rd, the liberation of Nardia stands as one of Ukraine's biggest victories. That brings us to a question: why does Nardia matter? It's an obvious question to ask given the tiny size of the village. Even before Putin's invasion, Nardia was little more than a minuscule farming community that seemed to hold no tactical advantage for Russia's army. At least, it looks that way on the surface. The reality is that Putin wants Nardia so badly because the village allows him to apply pressure on Ukraine elsewhere. Pressure that would ultimately lead Russia into Kharkiv. Euromaidan Press touches on this in its report on Ukraine's Nardia success. It points out that capturing the village offers Ukraine several tactical advantages, including the ability to both monitor and control the Black Zerabets River. From that river, Ukraine can also keep an eye on the settlements of Ryhorodka and Zhuhoreln, both of which are currently under Russian occupation. That's massive for Ukraine. Now that it holds Nardia, it essentially has a staging area for future assaults against other territories that Russia controls. Putin will be furious. His forces were already stretched in Luhansk, especially because Russia's leader believed he had almost total control of the region. He never expected Ukraine to counterattack in Nardia so soon after his troops took the village. Now Russia's soldiers may find themselves dealing with more assaults in the future by a Ukrainian brigade that has a long track record of liberating territories Russia believed it controlled. So Ukraine gets to apply pressure on Russia's forces with this capture. It also relieves pressure on its own soldiers. Capturing Nardia means that Russia loses the ability to use the village as a staging area. That means Putin's forces can't launch the mechanized assault on the village of Kapanki, which in turn makes it more difficult for Russia to push on toward other settlements that head in the direction of Kharkiv. As Volodymyr Fokin, who commands the 1st Assault Battalion of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, put it, "Overall, we've established our defensive line and secured more advantageous positions for defense. That defense will be needed because Putin wants Kharkiv, even if he says he doesn't." Back in May 2024, Putin laid all of the blame for his invasion of Kharkiv at Ukraine's feet. "When it comes to what's happening in Kharkiv, that's Ukraine's fault too," he said in a video published on the official Kremlin website. "Because they have been shelling and sadly continue to target residential neighborhoods in the border areas, including Belgorod. And I've said publicly that if this will continue, we will be forced to create a safe zone, a sanitary zone. That is what we are doing." Putin is talking out both sides of his mouth here. On the one hand, he's claiming that Russia has no designs on Kharkiv and doesn't intend to take the city. That doesn't gel with the fact that February 24, 2022 saw him send 20,000 soldiers south from Belgorod, which is a Russian oblast, to capture Ukraine's second-largest city. He tried and failed before. Now, he was claiming Russia never wanted Kharkiv in the first place. On the other hand, he essentially said that he wanted the city, not for any expansionist agenda, of course. Kharkiv is supposed to become some sort of demilitarized buffer zone between Ukraine and the border region of Belgorod, allowing Putin to prevent Ukraine from entering Russian territory. As is so often the case, it's all double-speak from Russia's leader. The reality is that Putin wants Kharkiv for many reasons. Its status as Ukraine's second city means that its capture will be a massive morale boost for Russian troops, while also demoralizing Ukraine. Putin also speaks the truth about wanting to turn Kharkiv into a buffer. Since his May 2024 comments, Ukraine has invaded the Russian oblast of Kursk and launched multiple offensives against Russia in Belgorod. Capturing Kharkiv, for which Nardia was a key component, would relieve pressure on Putin's troops. But perhaps most importantly, capturing Kharkiv would be a massive symbolic victory for Putin. In 2014, when Putin annexed Crimea, pro-Russian activists briefly seized power in the Ukrainian cities of Donetsk and Luhansk. They tried the same in Kharkiv, only to be swiftly booted out of the city. These incidents sparked a brief war in the Donbass region, with Kharkiv becoming a key focal point for Ukraine's military, according to DW. Russia lost that brief war. In doing so, Putin lost the chance to not only claim Ukraine's second city, but also get his hands on several military facilities that are in and around Kharkiv. These include an arms depot dating back to the Soviet era, along with an airbase Putin could use to launch assaults against other Ukrainian cities, including Kyiv. So don't believe Putin for a moment when he says he doesn't want Kharkiv now that he's reignited war in Ukraine. The city is very high on his agenda. Nardia was key to capturing Kharkiv because it provided Russia's forces with a staging area and routes into other settlements that might have allowed Putin to surround and assault the city. We touched on morale earlier. That's another key reason why Ukraine taking Nadiia matters so much. It provides the rest of Ukraine with a massive confidence booster at a time when it really needs one. The Telegraph highlights the importance of what the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade achieved when it points out that taking Nardia is a rare success in an area almost fully held by Russia since the 2022 invasion. It says that Nardia is the first village Ukraine has managed to fully retake in the Luhansk Oblast since Putin launched his invasion, making the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade's victory huge. Not only does taking Nardia mean Ukraine can now focus its efforts on other settlements Russia controls in Luhansk, as we mentioned earlier, but it comes at a time when the appetite for war with Russia seems to be waning in Ukraine. At least that's according to Russia's TASS media agency. On March 17th, it reported that the Ukrainian army's morale was at rock bottom, following its supposed defeat in Kursk. That much of the report may be true. Around 86% of the territory Ukraine took when it counter-invaded Kursk had been retaken by the time of the TASS article's publishing. That was a huge blow to Ukraine. It was relying on holding Kursk to use the territory as leverage over Putin in any future peace negotiations. More questionable are the claims from Vitaly Ganchev, a former Ukrainian police officer and lieutenant colonel. Ganchev's motive for talking about Ukrainian morale are questionable. Why? Well, he became a pro-Russian collaborator when Putin launched his first war against Ukraine and has essentially been a propagandist for the Kremlin ever since. Ganchev told TASS, "When Ukrainian soldiers are taken prisoner, they talk about hardships in the Ukrainian army. Troops on the battlefield are under pressure from their commanders and retreat-blocking units of nationalist battalions and can hardly speak up. Their morale is at rock bottom, the more so as they see defeats on the front line, for instance, in the Kursk region. It makes sense that the Ukrainian army would be demoralized." As twisted toward Putin's agenda as Ganchev's words are, there is an element of truth behind them. Ukraine is struggling with a morale problem. A more reliable examination of this issue comes from Responsible Statecraft. Reporting on the November 2024 Gallup poll, the outlet reported that 52% of Ukrainians polled said they wanted an end to the war with Russia. That seems obvious. However, the most important aspect of this statistic is that the 52% who said they wanted to end the war claimed they prefer that end to come via peace negotiations rather than a continued fight. Those numbers are notable because they represent a substantial decline in Ukraine's appetite for fighting since Putin launched his invasion. In 2022, a similar Gallup poll found that 73% of Ukrainians wanted to keep fighting against Russia. In 2023, that number had dropped to 63%, which is still a substantial majority, but also highlights how much of a negative impact Putin's attritional war has had. The number who wanted to keep fighting declining even further a year later shows us that everyday Ukrainians are now demoralized after around 3 years of conflict. This is where Ganchev's kernel of truth comes into play. That demoralization arises because Ukrainians have seen so much of their territory either get overrun or constantly bombarded by Russian soldiers. They've also seen their country launch a failed counteroffensive during the summer of 2023. More recently, the morale boost that came from capturing territory in Kursk has now been reversed now that Russia, with the help of North Korean soldiers, is pushing Ukraine's forces out of the oblast. Nardia becomes more important in the wake of these morale issues. As the Telegraph noted, Ukraine has just experienced its first real win in Luhansk since the beginning of Putin's invasion. It's taken a key territory that has led to a high material cost for Russia's forces and may deliver Ukraine the ability to push deeper into Luhansk. Morale may be down due to what's happening in Kursk, but by retaking Nardia, Ukraine's military has sent important messages, both to Putin and its own people. For Putin, the message is simple. Ukraine isn't going to stop fighting. Worse yet for Russia's leader, it's now focusing its efforts on territory Putin thought Russia had secured. His plans for Kharkiv lie in tatters, and he may now have to deal with a renewed Ukrainian push into Luhansk. As for Ukraine's people, the message is to never give up hope. Yes, Russia is intensifying its assaults in 2024, and the loss of so much territory in Kursk hurt. but Ukraine can and has experienced key victories against Russia's forces. Nadiia can now be held up as an example of why Ukraine keeps fighting. And who knows, the village might just become the key in Ukraine's efforts to defend both Kharkiv and retake Luhansk. But what do you think about the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade's victory in Nardia? Is this a huge win for Ukraine in its defense of Kharkiv and its efforts to retake Luhansk? What will Ukraine do from here? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for the latest news about Ukraine's battles against Russia's invading forces.